Hello, Bobcats. It's Mrs. Wilhite again, 5th grade math. We're still in chapter 2. We are still dealing with multiplication patterns. You can see that it's still a 5th grade standard, something you are required to learn to be ready for the grades that are coming your way. And I'm hoping that today, at the end of the lesson, you'll be able to use patterns to multiply mentally. Something that stands out to me is that word mentally. And what I'm hoping is that you'll be able to solve the problems that are in front of you in your mind. So I'm going to give you some strategies or some patterns to notice. And once you notice those patterns, you'll be able to multiply in your mind. So why? There's that question. Why, Mrs. Wilhite? What's the main idea? What's the purpose? Why do I have to learn this? Well, you already know. You have to because it's a 5th grade standard. But also I put that word fluency, and fluency is speed. It's being able to do things quickly. It's nice to be able to solve some multiplication problems in your mind so you can address things quicker. And so hopefully at the end of today's lesson, you'll use patterns to multiply in your mind quickly. All right, before we start into what we're learning today, I want you to think, what do you already know about patterns? Okay, that word patterns. Well, you can think about patterns being on clothing, like a red and blue stripe, a red and blue stripe. So patterns have to do with sometimes repeating something. So if I look at this math, I'm looking for patterns. What do I know about patterns? Well, 7 times 10 is 70. And then I also know 7 times 100 is 700. So a pattern that I see is the zeros. The zeros here are getting a little bit different. In the first problem, 7 times 10, I notice there's a pattern, there's 1 0, 1 power of 10. My answer also has 1 0, or a power of 10. 7 times 10 is 70, or $70. If I look at the second problem, I have 2 powers of 10, or 10 to the second power, which is 100, 10 times 10. So 7 times 100 is 700, or there's 2 zeros just like 100 has 2 zeros. Or 70 has 1 0, just like 10 has 1 0. So from my experience, I know that patterns are things that repeat or things that stand out, something that you recognize that helps you figure out what's coming next. So hopefully we'll figure out some patterns today that will help us solve or figure out what's coming next. All right, again, we're using those patterns to help us solve in our mind. Here's the steps that I think will help you with today's lesson. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply the basic fact. So step 1, multiply. Step 2, after we multiply, we're going to count the zeros in both factors. So 1, multiply. 2, let's count those zeros. Step 3, we get to write the total number of zeros. Okay, so we multiply the factors. Okay, and I count how many zeros there are, and then I write that amount of zeros. However many I counted, what was the total? And then finally, step 4, that step that's there every time, is it reasonable? Remember, before you move on to the next problem, think about the answer you got. Does it make sense? Is it reasonable? All right, let's see what these steps look like. All right, Math in My World, example number 1. Pet Paws is ordering more goldfish to sell at their store. Do you think that's because goldfish don't usually last very long? No, I'm just kidding. Each goldfish costs $2. Use the table to determine the cost of 10, 100, and 1,000 goldfish. Describe the pattern, oh, there's that word. Describe the pattern in the number of zeros when multiplying the cost $2 by powers of 10. All right, and they also give me a table, so I know that the table is incomplete. So example number 1, 2 times 1 is 2, and it says the number of zeros in the product. Well, I know product is the answer to a multiplication problem, and there's no zeros in this multiplication problem. So that's why they put a 0 for the number of zeros. 2 times 10, well, I know 2 times 10 is 20. And the number of zeros in the product, the answer, well, there's 1 0 in my answer. 2 times 100 is 200. And number of zeros in the product, well, there's 2 this time. 2 zeros in the answer to my multiplication problem. 2 times 1,000 is 2,000. Okay, and again, I notice that there's 3 zeros in my product. And before I even read what's down below, I'm going to think about the steps that we just went over. And it says to multiply that factor. So the first step was to multiply the factor. Well, the factor is 2, and then the other factor is 1. So 2 times 1 is 2. So if we look at what I solved, the factors itself without any zeros would just be that number 2. This is when you're just multiplying the factors. I notice there's 1, 2, and 3 zeros. Oh, look, 1, 2, 3. There's 1 0, 2 zeros, 3 zeros. So I'm definitely noticing some patterns in what I did. The number of zeros in the product, or the number of zeros in my answer, increases. It goes up. Well, that's true. There's 1, 2, and 3. It increases when the power of 10 increases. So I have 1 power of 10 and 1 0. I have 2 powers of 10 and 2 zeros. 3 powers of 10 and 3 zeros. Yes, it does increase. Each successive number of 10 adds 1 0. So this has 1 0. Oh, and I have 2, so now I have 2 zeros, and then I have 3. Each time you're multiplying by a power of 10, you have to increase that 0. That's definitely a pattern that we're going to see as we move forward in the problems. Well, and of course the last thing, is it reasonable? Well, it is reasonable that if I bought 1,000 goldfish, that it is going to be increased compared to buying just 10 goldfish. So my answer does make sense. The table is getting larger. It is growing in its number. All right, we're still in Math in My World. It says, how many zeros are in the product of 7 and 100? Well, product means the answer to a multiplication problem. So they're asking me to multiply 7 times 100. And 7 times 100 is 700. But they're asking how many zeros are there? Well, if I were to look at 700, there were 2 zeros in the answer. How many zeros are in the product of 21 times 10? Well, it's a multiple of 10 and I only have 1. So then there's going to be 1 0. Or 21 times 10 is 210 with 1 0. How many zeros are in the product of 12 times 1,000? Well, I can see that 1,000 has 3 zeros. So step 1, multiply those factors. I can do 12 times 1. That's 12. Count how many zeros is step 2. Well, there's 3 of them. So I can write that in my product. And the question is asking how many zeros are in the product, and the answer, well, I have 3 because 1,000 also has 3 zeros. I know my answer is reasonable because the pattern is if I'm multiplying by 10, well, that's 1 0. If I'm multiplying by 100, it has 2 zeros. If I multiply by 1,000, it has 3 zeros. I can move on. All right, example number 2, Math in My World. Write 10 to the second power, or 10 squared, without exponents. Well, I know 10 to the second power from yesterday's lesson was 10 times 10. Right? And I know 10 times 10 is actually equal to 100. So they're really asking me here, what is 13 times 100? Well, I can say 13 times 1, step 1, remember those factors. 13 times 1 is 13. Step 2, count the zeros. Well, 100, or 10 to the second power, has 2 zeros. So I can solve this problem in my mind by using those steps. It's reasonable because 13 times 100 would give me 13 $100 bills. Step 2, or example part 2, count the number of zeros in the power of 10. Well, as we saw here, there's 2 zeros. So I counted and there's 2 of them. Compare the number of zeros to the exponent. Oh, wow, look, there's a 2 as an exponent and there's 2 zeros. So it's a pattern. Write the zeros to the right of 13. Well, I know the answer is 1,300, or 2 zeros in my pattern. So the product, or the answer to the multiplication problem, is 1,300. And that's definitely reasonable. All right, guided practice. Find each product mentally. So I need to solve these problems in my mind. And I'm going to multiply, because it says product. So 8 times 10 to the second power. Well, 10 to the second power means it has 2 zeros, or it's 10 times 10, or 100. So I can go ahead and write 100 here. And then it's asking me, well, how many of those zeros do I have? Well, there's 2, just like the exponent says. So 8 times 1, multiplying those factors first, is 8. and then add your zeros in the pattern, 800. It's reasonable because 10 to the second power, 10 squared, is really 100, and 8 times 100 is 8 $100 bills. I have the right answer. Okay, guided practice number 2, find each product mentally. Again, I'm trying to do this in my mind. That's our goal today. So 14 times 2, those are the facts. That's step 1. If I multiply 14 times 2, I get 28. The total number of zeros is step 2. Well, I can see there's 3 zeros. So 14 times 2, 28, and my 3 zeros is 28,000. Or 14 times 2,000 is 28,000. It's reasonable because I'm multiplying by 1,000, 2 of them. So I definitely need to get an answer that's also in the thousands. So I can go ahead and move on. All right, yay, independent practice. Find the product mentally. So again, I'm trying to solve it in my mind. I'm going to multiply the factors. 13 times 1 is 13. I can count the zeros and see there's 3 of them. So 13 times 1,000 is 13,000. Okay, 10 to the second power, or 10 squared, is 10 times 10, or 100. So multiply those factors. Step 1, 37 times 1, 37. Count those factors, or look at the exponent. Oops, I don't need that comma there, sorry. And I know that there's 2 zeros. So is it reasonable? Well, if I'm multiplying by 1,000, it makes sense that I would get 13,000. That's reasonable. 37 times 100 is 3,700, or 37 $100 bills. So this is reasonable because I'm using the pattern of the zeros. I'm ready to move. All right, I'm still in independent practice. I'm going to find the missing number, and notice that I did skip over to number 9. So there's a missing value, that gray square, and I got to figure out what that is. Well, I'm still going to be using the same steps, and I'm going to first multiply the factors. Okay, well, the first factor is a 1, so something times 1 got 7. Oh, okay, well, that's 7. The only way to get 7 times 1, the only way to get 7 is to multiply that by 1, and that's what I'm doing. So now I just got to figure out what's next. Well, let's check and see the value of 10 to the 4th power, or 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. Well, 10 to the 4th power is 10,000 because it has those 4 zeros. 70,000. So, it makes sense that 10 to the 4th power is 10,000. So 7 times 10,000 does equal 70,000. It's reasonable that the missing number is equal to 7. Let's move on to the next one. Again, what is the missing value? Well, start with step 1. 3 times some factor will equal 12. Well, I know 3 times 4 is 12. Well, and I have 2 zeros already here. That leaves me with 2. So maybe these 2 might go here. Let's see if that works. Is it reasonable? Well, 3 times 4 is 12. And 300 times 400 would give me those 4 zeros. Oh, it's reasonable. So I know the missing value is 400. It makes sense. All right, problem solving. Number 13. Each box contains 2 to the 2nd power of pencils, or 2 squared. The school store has 15 boxes of pencils. How many pencils does the school store have? Well, I see a question mark, so I better underline this. A question mark means I have to answer it. I have to write whatever I think the answer to that question is. How many pencils does the school store have? Well, they ordered 15 boxes, and each box has 10 to the 2nd power, or 10 squared. Or, remember, 10 times 10 is 100. So can I solve 15 times 100? Absolutely. 15 times 1 is 15. And I count the zeros, 1,500. So I understand the answer to be the school has 1,500 pencils. It's reasonable because 10 to the 2nd power has 2 zeros, and 1,500 also has 2 zeros. All right, problem solving. Number 15. A group of friends bought 7 tickets to a dog show for $30 each. How much did they spend on the tickets? Well, if $30 is the price of 1 ticket, How much would it cost if I wanted 7 of them, or if I bought 7 of them? Well, multiply the factors. 3 times 7. Well, I know 3 times 7 is 21. And then there's 1 0. So I understand the answer is they bought $210 worth of tickets, right? Because the question that I underline is how many tickets? How much did they spend on the tickets? Well, they spent $210. It's reasonable because it has 1 power of 10 and my answer has 1 power of 10. I'm ready to move. All right, it's your favorite slide. I want you to think, what did you learn today? So before you go into your independent practice, whether that's your workbook pages or the MyMath digital format, I want you to think about what was our goal. Well, our goal was to be able to mentally do some math, to be able to work on some math problems quickly in our mind using patterns. So today, I learned a lot. But in summary, I learned that you can see what is the power of 10. If it has powers of 10, that will help you multiply in your mind. If it's 3 powers of 10, 1,000, then my answer should be somewhat in the thousands. If it's 2 powers of 10 or 100 and you're multiplying, then your answer should be also in the hundreds. So I learned that patterns can help you multiply in your mind. Thank you for your attention.